It's the age-old battle. Lump sum versus dollar cost averaging.
Brian, I am so excited to talk about this because inevitably, at some point through your financial life, something's going to happen. You're going to have a windfall or a bonus or some money come into your possession. Say, man, I need to figure out what to do with this money. How do I put it to work so that it can work harder than I do with my brain, my back, and my hands?
Well, I want you to, we got you covered because you're going to find out that there's actually a place for both of these tools. But before we jump into it, Bo, we ought to go ahead and just, anybody who's new to finance, and we're picking up constantly thousands of people every month who are brand new to our channel, let's explain what is lump sum investing and what is dollar cost averaging.
Yeah, let's do some Webster Dictionary type definitions. Lump sum just simply means investing a large sum of money all at once rather than spreading out that investment over time. Whereas if you think about dollar cost averaging, it's actually investing a large sum of money in smaller, equal dollar amounts over time at a regular frequency. And that frequency could be like weekly, monthly, etc. So if you think about this and you said, okay, I've got some money to invest and I've got $500 a month. Should I do it monthly or should I do it at the beginning of the year? How would that practically look? We want to show you a visual example. So to lump sum invest is pretty straightforward. At the very beginning of your period, if you had $6,000, you just dump it in right there at the beginning, $6,000.
Now, look, it is interesting when you look at a visual of this, and is that you see the market does look, it's definitely higher, but there's a lot of gyrations
up
and
and down,
volatility.
up and down.
And this is just us choosing just the last year. It's not like we scientifically say, let's just go look at the 12 months. So, but what would it look like if you were actually doing this from a dollar cost averaging standpoint?
Yeah, if you were going to dollar cost average $500 on a monthly basis, you would have 12 different entry points over the course of the year. On the same day every month, you would put in 500. And then on that day of the next month, 500 and 500 and 500. And what's actually happening as you're putting this money to work, you are investing a fixed dollar amount such that your cost per share of whatever investment or indice you're buying is being averaged out over time. That's how they come up with the name, dollar cost averaging, systematically putting your money to work over time.
Well, I think you're probably, when I looked at that visual, I would be saying, well, I can see that the market was higher, so it looks like lump sum would have been better. But man, it probably felt good from an emotional standpoint on those months that the market was getting its teeth kicked in or had a little extra volatility if I was buying that $500 then. So, Bo, can you explain to me, how does this actually look because we just gave the example, but let's actually put some numbers to it and actually walk through a case study on this.
Well, I imagine the question people are asking is, which one is better?
Yeah.
Like, which one, should I lump sum invest or should I DCA? How do I know which one turns out better? So again, if we think about this case study, you have two different investors. One invest $6,000 at the very beginning of the period. By the way, we're just, for those of you out there listening on Spotify or iTunes, we're just looking at the S&P 500 from March of 2024 through March of 2025. So this most recently completed 12-month period. And we said, okay, the lump sum investor is going to invest $6,000 right at March in 2024. And the dollar cost averager is going to do $500 a month every month all the way from March of 24 to March of 25. Well, as we get to the end of the 12-month period, the lump sum investor, the one who dumped in the $6,000, that investment would now have turned into $7,767. When you compare that to the dollar cost averager, that sum, those $500 each month over 12 months, turns into $6,686. So in this case, it looks like, oh, lump sum must be better.
For sure. I mean, think about that. That's almost an $1,100 difference in just a 1-year period. I would solidly be in team lump sum. And that makes sense. I mean, because if you think about it, as we've shared with you, markets typically go up over the long term. So that this makes sense. But so right now, I would tell you I'd be on team lump sum.
Yeah, so if markets go up over the long term, the idea, the conceptual way you think about this is the longer my money is invested, the longer it could be working, the better off it would be. So mathematically, if markets are up 8 out of 10 years, it seems prudent and rational that lump sum investing would come out ahead more often than dollar cost averaging.
So much so that Vanguard does a study, and we love looking at this. When every so often they update this study, and it stays pretty consistent. But you can see from the most recent version we were able to pull, lump sum does win out 68% of the time. And if you're 100% equity investment.
And again, that makes sense because more often than not, the market is up. And if there's a long-term upward trend in the market, then it seems like that's what would come out better most of the time.
But I do feel like we need to put the caveat. If you read this same Vanguard research study, and we've done this, like I said, several times. We've done many episodes because we've been doing content since 2006. I'm amazed at how similar this number, if you actually compare lump sum to dollar cost averaging over an extended period of time, you quickly see that the actual performance difference is only around 2%.
Oh, okay. So let me get this right. So 68% of the time, lump sum is better, but on average, how much better it is only a 2% difference.
Now you're seeing how this is a little more nuanced. I mean, and look, we can go ahead and we can show you. It is great to be an S&P 500 investor because if we went back to this chart goes all the way back to 1989 to present, you can see you'd be up 3,300%. Nobody is going to be upset about that. And by the way, we're not saying dollar cost average for like years on end. We're talking about, should you think about the entry point for just a short period of time to maybe figure out if some volatility or mind issues, behavioral stuff comes into play too.
Yeah, that's the question that people ask. All right, if the market, you're showing us the S&P 500, it's just up substantially over long periods of time, why on earth would I dollar cost average if 68% of the time lump sum turns out better and it only turns out 2% better? Why would I ever consider dollar cost averaging if there's not a huge difference? Well, there are a few reasons. And one of the ones, one you just alluded to, it does smooth out the entry point rather than trying to decide. I mean, how many times have you been in the situation where you turn on the nightly news and, markets are reaching all-time highs, and you think to yourself, oh gosh, I don't want to invest right now because market's at an all-time high, and Warren Buffett told me that I should buy low and sell high. Or maybe you turn on the nightly news and it says, oh, the sky is falling, market's crashing. You think, oh no, this is a horrible time to invest. Well, if you're dollar cost averaging, your entry points get to be at all of those time periods. So you have to worry if you're making the absolute worst decision at that point in time.
So it definitely smooths out the entry point. But here's the big thing, the takeaway for me is that we gave you the math that the Vanguard study showed that 68% of the time it was better for lump sum. But that still leaves the other 32%. That means if we have down years, you're probably going to sleep a heck of a lot better, especially if this was life-changing money. Because we just came through a period here where the market has had volatility just in the last month and a half.
Absolutely.
And you cannot tell me that the emotional just gut check that people get when you put all this money in at once, there's a cost to that. So we want to kind of look at some case studies and say, we saw where lump sum just on the last year was hands down a huge winner. I mean, I'm talking about by double digits. But how about if we did a case study for a period where maybe the market just wasn't as rosy because it was part of that 32%.
Yeah, so what does it actually look like when dollar cost averaging beats lump sum? And you just said that this tends to happen in periods where things are the most scary, the most uncomfortable, the most volatile. So if we take two investors, let's take lump sum Larry, and let's say that lump sum Larry is going to invest $120,000. And he gets this lump sum and he's going to invest on October the 1st of 2008. Now, I know we have a lot of younger listeners out there who perhaps were not investing in 2008, 2009. So if that describes you, this may not have been the very best time to begin your investing journey to put some money to work.
Yeah,
right?
I know. Let me throw out two names that you don't see anymore, but they were everywhere. Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, these things. 2008, I'll never forget. It is like a shot heard around the world with how fast things change when we hit the Great Recession.
So lump sum Larry dumps in $120,000 on October 1st, 2008. Well, now let's look at his counterpart. Let's look at DCA Diane. Rather than investing $120,000 all at once, she decides she's going to put invest $10,000 each month over the course of 12 months, starting on October 1st of 2008, going all the way to October 1st of 2009. And by the way, that was an incredibly volatile, incredibly tumultuous time in the market when you look back historically. And so when we look at the outcome of these two investors, Lump Sum Larry invested $120,000 in that 12-month period, and he actually only has about $108,000 at the end of the 12-month period.
But pause, because this is why it's important to be a long-term investor. Because when you look at this and you say you put 120 in, a year later it's 108, that's not telling half the story. Mm-hmm. Because if you're visually, and I'm saying this for all my podcast listeners, if you looked at this visual that we have right before us right now, yes, he put $120,000 in, but when we got around March of 2009, this thing was halved.
Cut in half.
I mean, it is cut in half. Now, fortunately, you've heard us talk about the pluck effect and other things, is that when you reach periods where markets have become irrational and detached from the actual intrinsic value of the markets, it's not uncommon that people panic sell, you lose, and if you will just stay the course, you will actually recover through that V-shaped recovery. And that's why Lump Sum Larry, if he stayed the course, he still came out with 108,000. But the key takeaway, and this is something we're going, because Bo's about to show you why dollar cost averaging could actually be a superpower or a helpful thing. The biggest thing I know we do as professional financial planners is that I try to protect people from themselves.
That's right.
Is because the majority of people, if you're going to cry uncle and jump out of the market and go to cash, and by the way, this is not my opinion. If you go look at what happened to cash levels during these times, all-time highs. So at peak market opportunity, because you can't tell me if you're buying in March of 2009, you're just a pig in slop. You are so happy with your decision that you made, but that's not what Americans are doing. We typically head for the exits as soon as the opportunity shows up, and that's what we try to help people from. So one of the tools we use is dollar cost averaging.
And the reason why is, again, Lump Sum Larry invested $120,000, only has $108,000 after that 12 months. DCA Diane, who was buying systematically, actually made money over that exact same period.
You're like, what?
She invested $120,000, and she actually has over $145,000. So over that 12-month period, you have two investors, one who lost money and one who was actually able to capitalize and make money. But again, that only tells part of the story, and we are not short-term investors. We don't just think about investing over a 12-month period. But if you do take these two investors based on when they started and you extrapolated this out all the way to present day, looking to right now in March of 2025, Lump Sum Larry, without investing another dollar, that $120,000 he invested is now worth over $833,000.
That's incredible.
That's amazing.
That's why it's great to be an investor.
So even if you get your timing wrong and you make a bad decision, the market freaks out, if you give it enough time, odds are you're going to come out okay. But if you are someone like DCA Diane who can buy through the turmoil, she's sitting here today, same $120,000 invested, with over $1.14 million. Just the behavioral difference in that 12-month period is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars down the line.
Now you're starting to catch on why this matters based upon also how big this money is and how much it means to you in life. And there's something when we start talking about, because as we transition into now the other side of the coin, why would you dollar cost average? Something that comes up, it's a unique little term, is sequence of return risk. And this is what you're worried about. If you retired in 2008, this is your worst nightmare.
Yep.
So that's why it's important to understand what your tools are and other opportunities and how you can mitigate these risks that you might be facing with your money.
And we've kind of been skirting all around this idea of, okay, well, DCA, it can smooth out your entry point. That's sort of like a mathematical thing. It can outperform during like market turmoil. Again, that's sort of like mathematics, what happens. It can mitigate sequence of return risk. Again, we're talking about like portfolio theory and what happens. But this last point is the number one reason why we recommend it. It's the number one reason why when someone comes in a lump sum, we think DCA likely makes sense, is it eases the emotional volatility. Because the worst thing that can happen is you decide that you've got this money. And again, you want to put this money to work and you want it to work harder than you do. And you're someone like Lump Sum Larry who gets so excited. You say, you know what? I'm going to invest my dollars. And immediately after you do that, the market tanks. And maybe that happens over the next month or 3 months or 6 months. And you begin thinking to yourself, oh no, what have I done?
Yeah, it's definitely the emotion part, the behavioral stuff is a key component of this entire endeavor. When I think about ways to dollar cost average, here's the good news. The majority of you are already doing that.
Yep.
If you think about the fact, if you've set up your, automatic for the people, you want to fund your Roth IRA and that's $7,000. If you're funding that monthly, you're dollar cost averaging.
Yep.
It's just by the automatic account builder that you set up. If you're somebody who has a 401k, your employer offers a 401k with a match and you've signed up to where every month when you get paid, money goes into the markets, you're automatically dollar cost averaging. So this stuff is kind of already happening just in a systematic way with a lot of the ways we save and build assets for retirement.
So when we're thinking about, okay, should I lump sum or should I dollar cost average or how do I decide? There are a few key takeaways we want you to rest on. The first one is know thyself. Understand what your unique financial personality are. It's not uncommon for us to have a client who has $1 million portfolios, but there's a single stock holding that represents a relatively small portion of their financial net worth. And depending on what that individual stock is doing for the day, will drive what their emotions are. If that sounds like you and that describes you and you're someone who allows your emotions to be impacted by what the broad markets are doing or by what an individual position is doing, then you might be someone who needs to DCA, because what DCA ultimately does is it removes the emotions out of the equation. You have a pragmatic and prudent approach to putting your dollars to work without having to get caught up in the emotional turmoil.
Well, a lot of people, this is going to shock people because we're just so transparent with it. We don't know what the market's going to do next year.
That's right.
For the next 2 years. I know over the long term, historically it's done very well. So, and by the way, the news media, they don't know either. So it's always hard when somebody comes to me with, say they have a lump sum from, a retirement payout, or they sold some real estate or other things, and they'll say, hey, should we put it all in? And I'm like, well,
we can.
If you could tell me what the market's going to do over the next year. Now, look, we don't like the dollar cost average for extended periods because the market, we know it's going up most years. So you do want to get in there. But there does come a value to trying to figure out, hey, maybe we should make sure you don't overreact or panic, because this is money that you're counting on. There's ways I can mitigate this so you don't have to bear all this risk. Even like we looked at that 12-month chart, Bo. You think about the difference. I know there's a performance gap there, but there's a lot of, like in this last month where we had a drop in the market of 10% in like a 2-week period. You can't tell me, even the person who was up a full, double digits over the person who dollar cost average, they would probably say, no, I'd be willing to trade now, because they don't know where the knife is going to fall.
Sure.
So know thyself is very important from a behavioral standpoint, and that's why I love that we can actually use both tools when we're doing financial planning.
Another takeaway is we want you to avoid analysis paralysis. Again, oftentimes when we have these financial decisions, we get so stuck on, okay, am I going to lump sum or am I going to dollar cost average? I can't decide. What am I going to do? When am I going to start? How am I going to do it? And you end up doing nothing. If one of these strategies will cause you to begin moving forward, and often it's DCA that allows you to do this, it would at least get you moving in the right direction. Because what we don't want to have happen is your money sit on the sidelines, and you wait until things feel more comfortable and feel better. And what you've actually done is missed all of the really, really exciting opportunities. So if you can implement one of these strategies, it will prevent you from analyzing yourself to death and not actually doing anything. Doing something is better than doing nothing at all.
Well, let me give you an example of analysis paralysis. We've been doing this long enough, Bo. There are people that, unfortunately, they fall prey to their emotions and they just sell it all.
Yep.
And then they're stuck there for 6 months. You think about like that 2008 to 2009 period. They're stuck there. They sold. They feel so brilliant and they feel so good because they avoided all the crazy stuff, or they avoided a portion of it, or maybe they sold at the dead bottom of it. But then they watch the market start to recover, and they're still sitting there in cash.
Going, when am I going to get back in?
It rips your heart out the other way, because when you time the market, you don't have to get it right once. You have to get it right twice. You have to sell it before the market drops. You also have to buy back in before it goes up. And that's just an impossible task. So when we have people come to us with these struggles, we always say, let's break through the analysis paralysis. Let's come up with a plan. This is a large enough sum of money that we can dollar cost average. And that's why the next point we always point to is you need to consider the size of the investment. Because if you're somebody, if your net worth is $100,000 and somehow maybe you inherited $100,000, or like I said, you sold a piece of real estate, or you had a pension or something come your way. If you put that $100,000 in there, that you would be like, oh my gosh, this is life-changing money. Yeah. So we've actually come up with what we call the Goldilocks rule to try to give you the best of both worlds. Take advantage of lump sum investing because markets typically go up, but also mitigating the behavioral stuff and letting you spread it out so that you don't get caught in the next great recession.
So when you think about the amount of money you're considering, either lump sum or dollar cost averaging, you want to compare it relative to your other liquid net worth, to your other portion of your portfolio. So that way you can determine how large is this relative. If you're someone who comes into $100,000 and you have a $5 million portfolio, the $100,000 might not be as substantial. If you're someone like Brian just said who has a $100,000 portfolio and you come into another 100, well, now it is substantial. So here's our little rule of thumb. If the amount of money you're coming into, either from an inheritance or a bonus, or you sell a piece of property, or you have money come your way, if it's less than 10% of your liquid net worth, we think you probably ought to just go ahead and lump sum that. Don't make it any more complicated than it needs to be. If it's 10 to 20% of your investable net worth, probably think about DCAing over a course of about 4 months. If it's 20 to 30%, maybe 6 months, 30 to 40%, 8 months, 40 to 50% of your liquid net worth, consider DCAing over 10 months. And then if it's greater than 50%, if the amount of money coming into your possession is greater than 50%, there's nothing wrong with thinking about easing that into the market over the course of a full year, taking 12 months. So here's a really easy example. If you had an investable net worth of $100,000 and you had a windfall of $50,000, that would be 50% of your liquid net worth. You would just invest $4,166 each month for the next 12 months to get all 50,000 of that put to work in the market.
And here's another contrarian thing of what I love about the Goldilocks rule is when you dollar cost average with a lump sum, and then remember every year, the average intra-year volatility is 14%. So if you are dollar cost averaging and then you hit bear market, because every now and then we hit bear markets, typically, twice a decade, you'll hit a bear market. If for some chance the market went down 20% while you're dollar cost averaging, there's nothing that says that you can't come up with a systematic. We've even done content on this. You can accelerate to even take advantage of that opportunity. So not only does dollar cost averaging allow you to spread it out so you don't get caught in the next great recession, it actually gives you an additional tool in your tool belt to maximize the opportunity. If you went back to 2008, 2009, it would be the ideal time. We kept it simple by just dollar cost averaging in a normal fashion every month. But if we would apply that to the example, it would have amplified it even more. So that's why I love that we're giving you rules. We're giving you real world opportunities so you can maximize your financial life.
Now, often when we talk about dollar cost averaging versus lump sum, we're talking about how to invest, how to put our money to work, how to get money working for us. But there's actually another instance where this comes into play, and this is often not talked about a ton. When it comes time for us to exit a position or to liquidate a portfolio or to come up with cash, what's the best way to get out of the market? Should I lump sum out, meaning sell everything right now today, or should I dollar cost divest or dollar cost average my way out of that? How do people go about deciding that?
Well, we see things come our way all the time where somebody works for a company or maybe you made a big play in a single stock. I mean, I have a really close friend. I covered it in Millionaire Mission that he put like 10 grand in Apple during the Great Recession, and it's
Turned out pretty good for him.
It's worth a lot of money. At some point, he's going to need to figure out a way to diversify that. We're still relatively young enough. I think he's fine, but at some point, he's going to need to diversify, and it's hard to figure out what's the right time to do this. So you're going to probably want to consider dollar cost averaging out of position. We also, Bo, we work with a lot of people who work with companies that they incentivize you with restricted stock, RSUs.
Maybe you're someone who had those RSUs, and when they vested, you didn't do anything with them, and now the company has done really, really well, and you have this large position with some embedded gains, or maybe you inherited some assets, but you didn't really think a whole lot about them, and now you're trying to figure out, okay, well, do I sell? Do I keep? How do I navigate this? Or maybe this sounds like you. Have you been someone who said, you know what, I've got this goal. Maybe I want to pay for a wedding, or I want to buy a new home, or I want to invest in a second home in a vacation property, but I don't know the timing. So I've been putting money in my after-tax account, building that up through time, but now we're getting to the point where I want to start getting access to those funds. How do I do it? Do I sell everything today and free up that cash, or do I come up with a plan? All of these are different scenarios where you're going to have to decide, how do I exit the position, and what's the best way to go about doing that?
Yeah, this is, and I think it'd be helpful if we walk through an example.
Sure.
And we said, let's not, because we could have gone many different ways. So, we could have done NVIDIA or some other, but he was like, no, let's choose, because there's a lot of people that bought Apple. So let's do an example of what Apple looks like if you were trying to get out of it.
Yeah, and we just said, let's look at the last 6 months, right? If you're someone who had a position in Apple stock over the last 6 months, and you said, you know what? I am a genius. I'm going to exit this position. I'm going to lump sum. I got a big old brain, and I'm going to sell it right at the end of 2024. And man, that would have been wonderful, because if you had done that, you would have hit the very top of the market. You would be feeling like a genius if you made that decision. But maybe you didn't make that decision. Maybe you're someone who says, oh man, it hit an all-time high, but Apple's still great, and I've got some money to run, and you know what, though? I'm going to sell it in March. And now, all of a sudden, it's not high as it was back in December. You're beginning to think, okay, maybe I don't have this figured out, because that's in that time frame, and literally just a 3-month time frame, it was a change of $50 per share, which could be substantial when you think about exiting the position.
Yeah, I mean, for those of you, once again, listening to the podcast, you're not seeing the visual. This looks like a W on the screen, and so it just shows you how hard it is. And so there's going to be some emotional trauma. No matter, now look, you might get lucky. Sometimes it's so much better to be lucky than good, is because you could sell this thing at the tippity top, but probably 3 years, 5 years, you're still going to have some regret, because it's going to be even higher. But what I love is if I can come up with a systematic way to take the emotion out of it, and also to protect you from the rapid, huge changes, that's going to be the better way to consider this. Now look, it's not an all or nothing, because we know, Bo, there are a lot of things that you need to take into consideration, especially when you're dollar cost averaging out of investments. We even had this discussion in our content meeting when we were talking to the writing team, is that there's some big things that you got to take into account, like taxes.
It's a huge one, yep.
I mean, because think about the fact that you might be able to, if you sold all at once, it might push you into a higher tax bracket, surcharges and all kind of other things. Or maybe you could spread it out over a little bit and bring down the tax rates, depending upon where the capital gains are. There's lots of planning. There's even 0% capital gains rates that are out there too that you can use in planning. So if you're not taking into account taxes, you're missing out.
Another thing to think through is the emotions of it. Are you someone who, if you sell today and the stock goes up after today, you're never going to forgive yourself? Or are you someone that if you don't sell today and the stock goes down, you're never going to forgive yourself? If that either one of those describe you, you may want to remove the emotion from it. Anytime we don't know what's going to happen in the future, when we find ourselves being emotional, we want to implement a system or a strategy that removes emotion from the equation. And dollar cost averaging is a great thing to do that, because if I sell today and the market goes up, great, I still have exposure if I'm dollar cost averaging. If I sell today and the market goes down, great, I capitalized on a higher price. It literally allows you to live in the best of both worlds. So emotions and your own unique emotions are another consideration you should have in addition to taxes.
And that brings up the last one, which kind of pulls all this together, and that's just risk.
Yep.
I mean, one of the biggest things that happens to us as financial planners is people will come to us with these concentrated portfolios, and it's now up to us to figure out how we take into account both the taxes, the emotions, but then also to educate them on that there's real risk. Look, we use an example of Apple. Apple, by all indications, great company, going to be here forever or whatever, and you feel some comfort with it. But I've worked with, Lucent Technology, other executives in the past where they had the exact same feeling that probably people at Apple, you just don't know. And sometimes when you've won the game financially, it's not about running up the scoreboard. There is this component. We always talk about risk tolerance. And a lot of people out there, you're watching this, and you're like, I'm a cowboy. I am a cowgirl. I can handle whatever the market throws my way. But there's another component that is going to just wake you up called risk capacity. You might be getting to the age you don't have enough time because you're living off these assets. You're pulling money out of this portfolio. If the market crushed too much at the wrong time, you don't have enough time to recover that you're going to eat it alive by pulling principal out during that. If you're not taking into account the risk after you've won the game, that's a problem because yes, you might be leaving some money on the table, but wouldn't you rather have success without the risk of absolute loss versus trying to run up the scoreboard when you've already met all your financial goals? There's a balance there.
So we've walked through, okay, when does lump sum investing make sense? And then when does dollar cost average investing make sense? And when does lump sum divesting make sense? And when does dollar cost divesting make sense? And you're probably thinking, okay, well, guys, which one do I do? You laid out all these scenarios. You did not tell me the right answer. This is the key takeaway that we would give you is as you're approaching these decisions, don't overthink it. Because oftentimes we get caught in analysis paralysis, but we know this as investors. If we give ourselves a long enough timeline and we allow our dollars to work long enough, it likely doesn't matter if we invested at the world's worst time or if we exited the position before it hit its all-time high. If we can put a systematic, strategic plan in place and we can do that consistently over time, odds are we're still going to be able to accomplish our financial goals and we're still going to get to where we ultimately want to be. What we have to do is we have to remove the ability for us to make the really, really bad, really, really dangerous decisions. And you have to answer that for yourself. Which one of these strategies is going to set me up for the largest amount of success personally, less so mathematically?
I love that we get to create educational content so that you are better with your money. You can grow your money that much faster. But I warn everybody that you will get to a point that success creates complexity. And without a doubt, everything we've covered today, because we're talking about primarily when you're talking about lump sum versus dollar cost averaging, we're talking about when you have large sums of money come your way and you're just trying to make sure you don't screw this up because it's probably not, you're not getting another inheritance. You're not selling another piece of real estate like this. You're not selling a business. You need to stick the landing on this because it's that important to your financial life. That's complexity. And that's why I love that we get to give you all this free advice. And the way our policy and our system works is it's called the abundance cycle. We don't get anything out of you until you've actually reached a level of success that you say, maybe I need to take this relationship to the next level. And that's why we have, if you want to go to moneyguy.com, we have a become a client section. Watch a short video on us, and this is the stuff we do. We maximize, help you navigate this stuff so that you know that there is a better way to do money. Why not make sure that your money is doing everything it possibly can so you can sleep comfortably at night and you know that you're making the best decision possible? I'm your host, Brian Preston, Mr. Bo Hansen, Money Guy team, out.
The Money Guy Show is hosted by Brian Preston and Bo Hansen. Brian and Bo are partners with Abound Wealth Management. Abound Wealth Management is a registered investment advisory firm regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission in accordance and compliance with the securities laws and regulations. Abound Wealth Management does not render or offer to render personalized investment or tax advice through The Money Guy Show. The information provided is for informational purposes only, may not be suitable for all investors, and does not constitute financial, tax, investment, or legal advice. All investments involve a degree of risk, including the risk of loss.